Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself really fast. I'm Chelsea Harrod. I'll go through some formal introductions here in just a bit. I know it is 1 o'clock, so we will get started here in just a few. I want to give everyone a chance to get admitted so that everyone can hear what we're talking about.
Wanted to invite or thank everyone for coming today. And we're doing the mandated reporting webinar. And we're really fortunate to have two social service specialists coming in to help us out, to answer a bunch of our questions, and to just really teach us information we may not all know about. So as you just heard speak, Chelsea Harrod is here, or Harrod, I'm sorry, is here. And she, let me give you a little bit of her background. She went to BCTC for undergrad as well as UK. And she has been with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services for since 2014. Is that right, Chelsea? Okay, good. Her boss, I'm cheating, her boss sent me their CVs, so I can kind of run with that. So here's the really important things. So her hobbies are spending time with her family and with her husband and her daughter and playing with their two puppies and their German Shepherds. So those are the important things that everyone needs to know. Sydney is also here with us, Sydney Lawson, who has been with the Cabinet since 2015. And she went to her undergrad at Moorhead and got her master's at Northern Kentucky University. So she is both a certified social worker as well as a licensed social worker. And if you know, there's nuances to that. Again, to the important information, her hobbies are spending time with her husband on their farm, and she enjoys hunting and working in the garden. So I'm just going to pass it right over to Chelsea, though, because you don't need to listen to me talk, and they have way too much information, and I don't want to take any more time up for that. I'll keep admitting people as they come in. As ever, if you remember, please to keep yourself muted unless Chelsea or Sydney ask for questions. You're always welcome to ask questions in the chat. And anything that we don't get to, we'll also have their emails where you can contact them. And we will be recording and are currently recording this. So the link will be sent out on all of our listservs. And if for some reason you can't find it, you can always contact me or anyone in KDLA and we'll hook you up. Thank you all for being here, for being willing to learn. And we're really looking forward to this. And Chelsea, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you. I am going to fix my screen here. So we first want to say thank you all for having us today. Sydney and I are very excited to be able to share some information about child welfare in Kentucky. And we hope you all are all doing well. And we hope that you'll be able to relax during this presentation. We have lots of information to go over. So we want to start off by saying that Sydney and I are very, very laid back. So at any time, if we're talking about something and you don't understand or you have questions, feel free to unmute or turn your camera on and jump in with any questions you have. Also, feel free to send a link or chat in the chat box. And between the two of us talking, we're going to try to keep an eye on that as questions come available. If you all do look in your chat box, I have at the very top, I shared a document, a Word document, and that is a notes page, and we'll give you all the opportunity if you want to follow along with the slides. I am going to apologize right now. I meant to send that out to you all yesterday for those who wanted to print that. So I'm very, very, very sorry that I didn't, but it is linked in the chat box. So you can download that and follow along, or if you have quick access, you can go on and print it out. I'm really not sure how many pages it is though. So we'll let you all do that. Don't see it. I will post it again right. Well, maybe.
I figure your worst case scenario is Chelsea can send it to me and I'll get it out to you guys later. So
I can. And now it won't let me post it again. I'm really sorry. I don't know why it won't do that. But yes, I will send out the PowerPoint afterwards so that everyone has access to it and can go back. And we'll get started from there. So like I said, feel free to jump in if you all have any questions at any time. I did turn off the noise. So as people join us, we'll keep an eye on that and add them as they come. So I want to jump right in. Today's objectives through this PowerPoint are that everyone should be able to gain the knowledge and understanding for Kentucky child welfare, dependency, neglect, and abuse reporting requirements, knowledge and understanding of how to observe concerns and red flags of abuse and neglect through a virtual platform, and knowledge and understanding of the steps during CPS intervention. So today we're going to discuss all of the steps throughout the process of a Child Protective Services case. Within our agency, though, we use lots of acronyms. So I'm going to try my best to make sure that I'm explaining everything thoroughly. And again, if I don't or you all are confused, just let me know and I will make sure I explain it. So the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974, also known as CAPTA, is the key federal legislation addressing child abuse and neglect. This act has been amended several times, and it was most recently amended and reauthorized by the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act of 2016. This act provides federal funding and guidance to states, to every state, and it supports prevention, assessment, investigation, prosecution, and treatment activities. And it also provides grants to the public agencies and nonprofit organizations. So whenever I talk about our policies, our procedures, or things like that within DCBS, which is the Department of Community-Based Services, and that is who Sydney and I work for, the way that we come up with those policies, I want to try to break that down so that everyone understands it. The first thing is federal code. So federal code is what everyone in the nation has to follow. And then each state individually has their own statutes. So we have Kentucky revised statutes. And then from there, it's broken down even further into Kentucky administrative regulations, which we call KAR. And then from there, our agency, which is the Cabinet or Cabinet for Health and Family Services, has our own policy. So that's our SOP, our standard of practice. So you have federal code, then you have KRS, which is Kentucky Revised Statutes, KAR, and then our policy. So really and truly, all of our policies that we have in Kentucky are all based on regulations, statutes, and federal code. So I just like to explain that so people know anytime we do anything, it's based off of a set of laws. And so we're only allowed to do so much or so little in certain cases. So I like to explain that to people first so they know where we get our policies and our procedures from. So mandatory reporting and what you need to know. State law requires that anyone with a reasonable suspicion that a child is dependent, abused, or neglected is required to make a report to the Cabinet. Failure to do so can be a criminal act as well. So I like to share this. This is the KRS, which is 620-0301. And this is the law around why in Kentucky it's a little bit different than other states. So when you hear the term mandatory reporter, a lot of people think about individuals that are on this list coming up in the slide. These individuals, peace officers, coroners, medical examiners, school personnel, child caring personnel, dentists, healthcare professionals, any organization. That's normally what goes through people's head are those are mandatory reporters. But as you can see, or as you saw in the last slide, I'm going to jump back to it just really quick. In Kentucky, well, it's not going to let me, just kidding. Oh, yes, it is. In Kentucky, everyone or anyone with a reasonable suspicion is a mandatory reporter. So some people get that confused because not all states have that type of law. So I'm going to jump forward 2 more. Sorry for the jumping around. I need to make those slides a little better. These are also the 2 more important statutes that we have here in Kentucky. So the first one that I want to go over is the good faith immunity. And that's KRS 620050. And basically what the good faith immunity is that any reporting source or individual who makes a report does so with good faith. And they also have immunity if a report were to be made from any type of civil action or criminal action, any liability from that. And then if you look down at 620050, the confidentiality statute is just that anyone who makes a report, that information, that personal information about the reporting source is kept confidential. I do like to share that in this statute, there is a clause about how that information could be shared. And the only way that that information would be shared is if a judge were to order who the reporting source was. And honestly, I've only seen this happen once in my career, which is rare. And the only reason for that is when a judge suspects that a case is being made wrongfully. And they do so, there's a lot of regulations around that and how a judge orders that. You can see it has to have a camera review, and the judge would have to look at the file, and that would all be recorded. So it is very rare that information is shared publicly, but that is the only way that can occur.
Chelsea, we do have a question.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of dependent here?
Okay, so dependency. So when we talk a lot about dependency, abuse, and neglect, and we are going to have definitions about all of those things coming up. So I'm not going to ignore the question by any means, but I do want to kind of put it on hold for just a few minutes because we have tons of information, and we're going to break down all the differences between dependency, what that looks like, what neglect looks like, and what abuse looks like, and what those definitions stand for in our policies as well as our regulations. So we will jump into that question here shortly. Thank you, Sydney. If anything else comes up, just holler at me.
I gotcha.
So, but first, hashtag 2021. I updated this slide a little bit just to include that we are in a new year. I don't quite know that 2021 has caught on, that we were really tired of 2020. I don't know if anyone else feels that way. I don't want to make assumptions. But we wanted to take just a second and talk about our current situation. And I don't know if we all agree, but I think most people have agreed that this year has been a little chaotic and crazy. It's definitely been one for the record books. Everyone has worked extremely hard to acclimate to a new normal for at least the foreseeable future. Our lives and the lives of individuals that we serve have changed drastically over the past almost year. Some experience day-to-day changes based on various situations. We've had global pandemic and we've had social unrest. So virtual learning and telehealth appointments to phased reopening plans and limited capacity settings. No matter what the reason is though, I think we can all agree that we need to continue to focus on the children and families of our community while being mindful of the safety for our own families and all of theirs. During these changes in our lifestyles and our work life, we've learned to roll with the punches and adapt as best that we can. It's presented many new challenges that most of us have been able to face head on, whether learning or creating new ways to continue to ensure that safety for all the children in our communities. But with that said, we wanted to discuss some of these challenges and how we address them through our line of work to continue doing the best to ensure the safety of children and families, especially in that virtual setting. And I liked this picture because I don't know how everyone on this call feels, but Sydney and I are working from home right now, as well as lots of social workers across the state. And I feel like this every once in a while.
So identifying child abuse and neglect during COVID-19 can be really tricky at times. This is in part because in-person gatherings have been very limited. Schools, churches, outings, etc., have had to move to an online means. We do have some tips for identifying child abuse and neglect in the virtual world. One of those is regarding a video call. While on the call, closely observe the background. While it's typical to see homes with children in disarray during this quarantine, look for signs that go beyond the messiness. Is perishable food sitting out call after call? Is there an absence of food, or do family members appear to be malnourished or losing weight? Are there signs of pests or rodents in the home? Do children appear significantly unkept or unbathed? One of the other tips you can do is to check in with the parents and caregivers. Offer these parents and caregivers an outlet to be heard in a non-judgmental way and see how they are doing and coping. How do they feel like the children are doing with online learning and the new schedule we've all had to adapt to? Look for signs or statements that indicate increased frustration. Parents are under a tremendous amount of stress right now. Ask questions to see how the parent is coping with that stress. Inquire what needs they have and what you could assist them with. Some of these questions could be, how are things going in the virtual learning? Do you have everything you need in order for the children to be successful in school? Are you or the children experiencing any technical difficulties or issues that you haven't been able to resolve? Just what does a normal day look like for you all? Have the children been acting out, or have you seen any dramatic changes in their behavior since all of this is going on? The stress of limited resources or financial burdens can be exacerbated during this time. Let the caregivers know they're not alone, and try to assist with resources if possible. This could be a referral to the Frisky or Family Resource Youth Service Center, or referrals to local food banks, housing assistance, etc. We do have slides later on in the training specifically for COVID-19 related assistance, as well as just other resources to assist families on a day-to-day basis. Speak with the children alone. Observe their reactions to who and what is around them. Assess the children's ability to focus. Does the child seem particularly stressed or emotional? Is their behavior in any way atypical of how they normally act? One of the big keys, okay, we'll get to your question here in just a second. I did see it though. One of the big key takeaways during this time is just be understanding, and we all need to have a little grace with each other. If a parent is expressing desperation, be empathetic. It is normal for parents to express frustration with statements such as, quote, being over it, or, quote, giving up. The red flags could be over rigidity in these statements, persistent expression of negative emotions, the inability to see beyond their immediate concerns, and or extreme frustration that suggests the possible increase or escalation to physical aggression. Understanding the new roles and parents are having to learn and adapt to. Because children are not attending schools, and I know now some kids are in person, some kids are not, some are doing a hybrid, but it's still much different than what we saw this time last year. Because children are not attending school, participating in sports and clubs, or running around the neighborhood with their friends, they're spending their days indoors, presumably with their parents, caregivers, relatives, for extended periods of time. This ultimately means that parents or caregivers are responsible for taking the roles of a teacher, a friend, a playmate, and coach around the clock for their children. Many may also be working from home, which is an added stress. They have to be all things to their children at all times while completing their own work. Finding a balance is virtually impossible. For some, the virus has caused them to lose their job. For others, they've been deemed essential and still have to leave their home and report to work every day. This comes with financial struggles, issues concerning and securing appropriate childcare, all while trying to help their children acclimate to the changes they're experiencing. Many are scared and are dealing with their own fears and anxieties while trying to remain calm and reassuring to their children. It is a heavy burden the parents and caregivers are carrying right now and can create levels of stress they may not know how to handle on their own. In regards to privacy concerns, know what your particular agency has in regards to privacy regulations. Make sure you're well versed in what's acceptable, not only as it relates to HIPAA, but also guidelines set by your particular agency. In some instances, it may seem like a good idea to take a screenshot of videos during teleconferences. However, you need to ensure you are adhering to the privacy laws regarding taking pictures, screenshots, or recordings of individuals without permission. If you cannot take a picture or recording of a situation, document your concerns thoroughly. Be very specific. When you observe something concerning, take note of the room. What room is it? What do you see in terms of furniture, bookcases, television, beds, etc., in order to be able to note where your concern is. Now, I do want to pause here. We did have a question. What if comments are through text or chat? Chelsea, do you want to help with this one?
Yep. So anytime, and I don't know, I know we've got a lot of people on this call, so you may all have different job duties. You may all have the same job duties. But anytime you're communicating and an individual expresses anything concerning through text or chat or something along those lines, my recommendation, depending, and I hate saying this, but I'll probably say it again throughout this training, but depending on what the language is, if a child is making threats to harm themselves or somebody else, immediately, my first recommendation would be to call law enforcement. Law enforcement will follow up with us depending on their case, but I would always start with that if it's an immediate threat. But secondary, if it's something, so text or chats can be saved on your device, right? Yeah, I mean, if an individual is sending you a message, I think it depends. I want to say it depends, because if it is a device that was provided to you through your position, through your job, for instance, like I have a work cell phone. And so when I'm communicating with any, if a client or on a case by case basis, and someone sends me something concerning, I would keep that. If it is on your personal device, my recommendation would be to send that to a work secured environment. If it is a work call, if it's a personal situation, you can keep that on your personal device. But if this is an encounter that that's coming through your job, I would send it to your workstation, if you have that available, or maybe your supervisor, for documentation purposes. I will say that and this is super far-fetched, so I don't want to scare people off with this, but like one of the rules that we have in policy for our workers is to be careful. Like if a worker goes to court to testify and they have something on their phone, attorneys can request that a court subpoenas that cell phone for messages. So just take note of that. Like if for some reason something was to be sent like that, I would take it to a workstation. That's just my recommendation. But I think that the question that Amy had, if comments are made through text or chat, I'm assuming that your question is, should you make a report? And it is going to be based on what the information is sent. If it's very vague information, you can always follow up with, clarifying questions. We will get in a little bit more detail about how to make the report and different things like that here in just a few slides. But I think if it's something that's vague or you're unsure, or if it's like an off the wall comment, you're like, oh, what does that mean? I think it's perfectly fine to make follow-up questions along with that. And then if that's all the information you have and it is concerning, you can always make a report, and we'll share that information on how to do that here in just a few slides. So Amy, I hope that I answered that question right. Okay.
And I
great.
did want to go back to Beth's real quick. I also think it depends on the platform that is used for these conversations to be had. Some are archived and kept, some, as we've all heard of Snapchat and the Disappearing Act, some go away after so long. It kind of depends on the platform that's being used to have this conversation, as well as settings set up within that platform. If you've got a delete after so long, or save all of them. So that would also depend on the device and the platform used to communicate.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so this slide is some tips and tricks to kind of help do these assessments via online communication. One of the big things is smaller group check-ins. When doing the virtual face-to-face with children, it can allow students or children to visit with other children, but also allows the professionals working with the children to have more one-on-one time with the kids, as well as focus more on individual students as opposed to a larger group of kids. One of the biggest things we know with working with children is making it fun. Kids will participate if we make it fun. We do have a couple of games that you could do through these online platforms. One is a virtual show and tell. So this could be pick one toy that you love, tell me about it, what's the toy's name, who got it for you. Another could be pick one adult in your house, who are they, what's your favorite thing about this person. Pick your favorite seat in the house. Have the children describe why it's yours or why it's their seat. What's their favorite thing about that seat? Another game you could play with the kids is a virtual scavenger hunt. So have the children find one book. Why is it their favorite book? Have the children find their pet if they have one. And what's this pet's name? Same with the child's favorite toy. What is it? Why is it their favorite? So when assessing a child's feelings and perspectives, have the kids tell you a story. So have the child, some examples could be having the child talk about one thing that made them happy today, one thing that made them sad or frustrated or mad that day, one thing they want to do tomorrow, one thing they could try harder at tomorrow, and have the children also talk to you about what they want to do when they grow up. Those are just some examples to kind of help gauge the child's feelings and perspectives. So the goals of those three games, those three examples we gave, are to help assist you all in developing relationships and building rapport with the kids, just like you would in person, as well as assess for any potential abuse or neglect towards a child or within the home. So look and listen. So this is one of the things, is paying attention to attendance and participation. For educational settings, not only checking on the child's attendance is beneficial, but also about the child and the family's participation in what's going on. Do the children seem more distracted than normal when you're communicating with them? Look for obvious, potentially dangerous items in the background. Are there guns or weapons within reach of the child? Does the child have access? So this kind of gets tricky. Seeing a locked gun safe in the background could be deemed a protective factor, and this is very different than seeing a pistol sitting on a coffee table, which could be seen as a safety threat. Are there drugs or paraphernalia setting out within reach of the child that you can see from the virtual platforms? Also, just look for physical signs such as ripped clothing or signs of possible physical abuse. Some questions to ask. So I've got some examples of questions we can ask children and their parents or caregivers to kind of see how to gauge and see how the family's feeling and what's going on in their lives right now. So for the children, you could ask the children, how are you doing? What is the best part of your day? What is the hardest part of your day? What do you like about staying at home? What do you like about missing? What do you miss about going to school? For the parents, caregivers, adults in the home providing care to the children, some questions you could just ask are, who are your supports? Are you able to contact them now? Since the emergency with COVID-19, what has changed within your family? Has anything been more of a struggle? Are you facing new worries or new needs? These questions may be a segue into identifying problem areas or other needs, or just allowing the individual to have an outlet to discuss their feelings given the pandemic and all the related changes we've been going through. It may also open up communication to allow you to offer additional assistance or service referrals for the families during these trying times. So one of the biggest things during this time we all need to kind of have an understanding about is poverty does not equal neglect. Many individuals who have regular contact with children and families may not make those routine home visits other professions do. It is important to have realistic expectations of the families and their homes. A major concept we need to understand when working with these children and families is their way of living may not align with ours, but that does not automatically mean abuse or neglect. Do your concerns go beyond a different parenting style or home environment? Are there concerns noted that are outside of just that scope of poverty? In order to ensure you understand poverty versus neglect, here are some questions to kind of help gauge in terms of the environment of the children, health and welfare, the different categories that we look at. So regarding the environment, are you concerned with the child's safety? A child's environment does not always mean their home. This could mean things they are subjected to within their home. A house in disarray due to children being inside majority of the time does not constitute environmental concerns. Look beyond the messiness. Are there safety threats observed? When looking at what constitutes as a safety threat, one must also take into consideration the age and development of the child. What might be more concerning for an infant or toddler crawling around may not be as concerning for an older school-aged or teenage child. In regards to the health and welfare of the children, does the child have access to food and medical care? A child may report they are hungry and do not have any food in the home. Is this accurate, or did the parent or caregiver simply not buy them the snacks they wanted to last time they were at the grocery store? The child could indicate the fridge is empty. The family could have used the last of the supplies for groceries that morning when making breakfast or lunch and planned to go to the store that afternoon. We cannot assume in these situations. We need to ask more. We need to ask more detail. When did the family last buy groceries? When are they planning to go again? The caregiver may have had to wait to go to the store for a paycheck or a benefit payment to come through. Does the child go to the pediatrician regularly? Are they on any prescribed medications? Does that family have the resources to pick the medicine up once the prescription is filled? We cannot assume, an example, little Johnny did not receive his ADHD medication today because of neglect. There may be other reasons or other situations going on that cause the family not be able to pick up the medication before they ran out. This is also a good opportunity to link the family up with resources if they do not already have access to them. In regards to family attachment, it is tricky. First of all, not everyone is qualified to make a judgment call on appropriate bonds and attachments. However, recognizing attachment can show positive relations between families and can show areas that are strained. Are there more than normal tension within the family? Take into consideration the age of the child and what we know about the child. So an example, a teenager may not exhibit much interaction with their parents or caregivers, which may just be normal teenage behavior. In regards to awareness and access to services, some questions you could ask is, does the family have access to services? Is the child eligible for the backpack program? Did they sign up for or receive the PEBT card? This is the pandemic specific SNAP benefits through the state. Can you assist in linking the family up with any other community services? If your concerns rise to the level of feeling worried about the child's health and physical safety, this is when you need to make a report to DCBS.
So now we're going to talk about a victim's disclosure. Sydney just gave lots of different tips and tricks on how to recognize things, whether in home or in a virtual platform. And if you all have more specific questions, again, feel free to ask. We wanted to talk about a disclosure because it's really the most important piece when it comes to child welfare. A disclosure is the first statement that an alleged victim or another individual gives regarding an occurrence of maltreatment. So we ask that in a situation when a victim or another individual is disclosing, and whoever is listening should not overreact or exaggerate with emotion. So why we say that is anytime you're listening to a disclosure, or if you've ever had to listen to a disclosure before, it can be very difficult in some instances. If a child or another individual is telling you a statement that they heard and maybe asking for assistance, some of the information that's disclosed can be really hard to hear. And sometimes emotion, and when you display that exaggerated emotion, it could cause a victim to shut down and stop disclosing. So we ask that you just listen attentively and try not to overreact in that situation. We also ask that you do not attempt to interview the individual or conduct your own investigation. So an unauthorized investigation is actually against the law. That's one of the things that we talked about earlier. It's the statute 620-040. And the reason why is it can compromise a criminal proceeding or an investigation, and it can also create liability for you as an individual and liability for officers and social workers. So that part's really, really important to remember. And it's also just really important to remember to remain calm and just listen very attentively anytime you hear a disclosure.
So Chelsea, we do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Hold on. So let me come back up here. The first one was an individual used to work in the education system and was told we could not ask about medication. Perhaps this was to the educational system, but asking about they were asking if asking about medication doesn't violate HIPAA.
So I don't know the particulars on why you would be asked to not ask about medication. I think that in a situation, if you're aware and you know that a child is prescribed a medication and is supposed to be taking the medication, I don't think that there would be any violation for HIPAA requirements if you're talking to a parent and asking, is this child still taking this medication, or was he able to take his medication today? I don't think that violates any form of HIPAA regulations. I don't know HIPAA forwards and backwards. It's a big document, but I'm pretty positive.
Okay, so another comment was made, wouldn't that be part of their IEP or 504? It could be. And that could be how you know is through those plans that made for that specific child for the school system.
Okay. And then
okay, hold on. Sorry, were you continuing with those questions?
No, I was moving on.
Okay, sorry, we got a couple more. One question was, how can we find out sufficient information for the report without doing an interview? What is that line?
Okay, so the difference between, and this is more of an opinionated question, I feel like, but in regards to our policies, in regards to statutes, investigating and interviewing are two different things. But if someone is disclosing something to you and I'm gonna go with a pretty drastic. So if a child is disclosing to you that they've been sexually abused, and their disclosure is something along the lines of that, my let's think of Bobo is a nickname. So this child says, Bobo touched my pee-pee. There's, in that situation, yes, empathy, 100%. It's the shock or the oh my gosh, when did that happen? Those reactions are the things that you want to be careful with. So if a child looks at you and says, Bobo touched my pee-pee, and you come back and you say, really? What's that mean? And you ask them, pee-pee, what is a pee-pee? What does that mean? Because not all children know appropriate terminology. And it's really important with nicknames. I'll get into this too a little bit deeper, but especially when nicknames are used by children, it's really important for a reporting source, if you can, or if you know who they're talking about. And this might be somebody that you know personally, and they said that, and you know who Bobo is. It's really important to see if the child knows who Bobo is. And has, if they can describe that person to you so that you can share that information. And I'll get into why that information is pretty crucial here in just a second. And then, so asking follow-up questions, that's not inappropriate. That would be necessary, especially in different situations. It's more along the lines of completing your own investigation. So if someone reported that to you and then you called, let's say you called, who Bobo is, or who the parent is, so you call and you start asking follow-up questions. That's where it turns into an investigation. And that's what we wouldn't want to occur. Okay.
And back to the question, asking if it's okay to show empathy. It is. It
Yes.
is. As Chelsea said, the shock or horror. I've actually had those cases where children saw a caregiver become upset over learning what had happened in the disclosures, and the child refused to disclose anymore at the forensic interview. And as more information came out and the child was spoken to again about different allegations, that particular child even said, I don't want to upset anybody. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to upset anybody. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So that's where you have to really kind of gauge your reaction and your facial expressions, because the kids pick up on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Okay, and looks like we've got the other questions answered in the chat. So an IEP is an individualized education plan, and the 504 are the disability plan based on health issues. Okay, so this slide that's on your screen right now is how to make a report. So you can see if during regular business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., excluding holidays. Those are our regular business hours. And so on this slide, you can see the web link for the online portal. So anytime during business hours, that web link is open and available to make an online report. And that link has been updated, so you can copy that down, or it will also be in the information we send after this. And I did put it in the chat box. I don't know if anybody was able to download it or not, but that online link is only open during those business hours. And then we have our statewide centralized intake hotline. And then our after hours hotline. So the two hotline phone numbers are available all the time, anytime. And the reason that the online portal is only offered during business hours is to ensure that if an emergency call comes in after hours, we wouldn't want it to be setting in an email box that wasn't being monitored directly, just in case it needed to be, if a worker needed to go out immediately. And then the next slide, if I can get my screen to work. This also tells the statewide centralized intake hotline phone number again. And then when you see this list of our DCBS regions, so in Kentucky, we have 9 service regions, and they're broken down, and you can see the list of each county that's in those regions. We wanted to share this information just because it can be helpful if you are, especially later on, we're going to share some resources. So if you ever have questions of what region your county falls in, you can utilize this list. Because if you ever need to reach out to like a frisky worker, or even if you're reaching out to the hotline and you have questions about different counties or different services that we can provide, it's just helpful to know what region your county is located in. So what do I say? So if you are, I want to make sure, are we good on questions, Sydney? Yes, I was able to download. Great. Okay, good. I'm glad somebody was able to get that. So if you have gone through the information so far and somebody has made a report to you or disclosed something to you, and you are calling the centralized intake hotline number, this is just to try to help you know how to report and what might be asked of you. So when you make a call to the hotline, report only what you have heard or seen, and don't try to interpret or paraphrase a child's statement. So this is going to pull back to that information that I was talking about with nicknames. So if a child uses a nickname when they're describing an incident of maltreatment to you, this is where that would become important. So let's say hypothetically that you are a neighbor and you're a child that lives next door to you or down the street is riding their bike, and you stop and talk to them and they tell you an incident of maltreatment, and they are using a nickname, and you know for a fact that your neighbor is Kiki. That's her nickname. Where that becomes important is when you're disclosing or when you're reporting the incident to the hotline, we want you to disclose what the child said. So if the child said, Kiki does X, Y, and Z to me, we would want you to disclose that and then follow up with the information that you know personally. So we wouldn't want you to misinterpret the statements that came from the child. That can be really important later on in an investigation during the forensic interviews that occur. And so what that means is anytime for sexual abuse, physical abuse, or human trafficking, we as the cabinet during investigations utilize advocacy centers around the state to assist with interviews. And a lot of times during those interviews, they really dive into nicknames and who people are to make sure that during the investigation, if prosecution occurs, we want to make sure that that prosecution and that investigation is on the appropriate individual. Please do not take away or do not add or take away any parts of the disclosure that you feel are not important, i.e. those nicknames. Those are a big one. Provide objective information and provide as much information as you can about the family, any contact information, last known addresses, where the children attend schools, if there are weapons suspected in the home. These things can assist the worker in locating the victim or the family quickly.
Also, don't assume on what the kids say. Back to those statements we were talking about earlier, those vague statements that you just can't get enough information. Report it just how it was reported to you, disclosed to you, but don't assume what the child was saying.
Right. And then when you call the hotline, what might we ask of you as a DCBS intake worker? They might dive into what your relationship is with the child or the situation, what happened, specific information regarding concerns or the extent of the abuse or neglect, what's the current location of the child or the perpetrator. And so the perpetrator is the individual who was thought to harm the child, to maltreat, whether it be abuse or neglect. So that is who the perpetrator is. What's the current condition of the child? And do you have any knowledge of previous abuse or neglect or any immediate safety issues? And then any information that you may have on the perpetrator.
We do have a couple questions. The first is, can we share contact? And this actually might be more of a question for Amy than us. Can we share contact information from the library ILS though? As librarians, we usually can't.
So I will, I don't know what the formal, what your formal guidelines are. Whether you can share information through your service, your, I guess, portal is what I'm going to call it. I guess that's what the ILS stands for. When we are filling out.
I can go into it in more detail, but it's my understanding that that is private and not releasable. So it would take a subpoena to release it. And even then, libraries have denied doing that because of precedents. I might be incorrect in this, so don't take this as law, but that is what I remember being taught and remember hearing. I think perhaps you guys can, if some of the directors can chime in on this, but that's my understanding. And I would tread on that very carefully and minimally checked with your branch manager or director before you release any information, and do your research ahead of time.
So Sharon just said that we only provide information with a warrant. That's my understanding as well. So I will say this, and I will definitely look into this information. Okay, an example might be if parents check out books on alcoholism. So I know with like the school system, for an example, the school system is allowed to share like phone numbers, addresses, information with the cabinet in regards to maltreatment or a child. If we have an active investigation, we have a form that we send to the school system and to notify them of that investigation, and then they can share information with us. So I will definitely look into see if there's any type of statutes or regulations that I'm not aware of that would include your all's department. And because that would be very interesting to have. But yes, definitely follow the information. It seems like warrant is the only reason or that you all would be able to provide that information. So definitely follow that rule. Agreed. And if an individual is checking out books regarding substance abuse or even domestic violence or sexual abuse or anything like that, that even if, just to give you all a little heads up, even if that call were to be made of this parent has 3 children and is consistently checking out a book that is in regards to substance abuse, that wouldn't meet our criteria. Sydney's going to jump into some more specifics on that here in just a few minutes. And it wouldn't meet our criteria because we don't know how the child is being affected. She'll dive into that a little bit more, but that's a really big key piece of an investigation or intervention from DCBS is that we have to know how a child is being affected by the maltreatment to be able to classify it and have that threshold for us to become involved.
If I may,
Chelsea,
Chelsea, also is libraries are unable to track, or we are not supposed to track a reader's history. And that is not something that we as public librarians do.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Yeah, I
Chelsea
didn't.
and Sydney, let me ask a question real quick in
Yeah.
regards to that. Would it be beneficial if in our reporting we report everything that we know of, and in regards to the current location, we explain that we are a public library and this person is a patron, but we cannot disclose any other information than that. And at that point in time, the DCBS could take that information, and if they choose, to come to the library or go about their investigating from that point, we've at least done our,
Due diligence. Yes.
due diligence. Yes.
Yes. And because you're not allowed to share that information, and again, I don't know if you all, one key factor, things that will be asked from the DCBS standpoint would be some of the questions that we would are a name of a child, dates of birth, addresses, phone numbers, school location, things like that. So if as a reporting source, if you suspect abuse and neglect, and if you have, if someone has disclosed to you, by law, you would need to make that report. So I don't know that you would be able to share private information. This is something I'm going to look into, but names of the individuals, I think, would be required. So I'm definitely going to dig in to see what the protective factors are in regards to statutes, because I don't think it would trump the mandated reporting law to report. Does that make sense? I don't think that there's any law that would trump that mandated reporting law. So I will definitely dig into those things. And Amy, I'm glad you're sharing these links, because I'll jump into those too and dig a little bit more. And then anything that I find, I will gladly share it back with the group. This is some great discussion. I love that you all have brought this up.
So we did have another couple of questions, and I want to kind of catch before we move on.
Yeah.
When filling out the form, are there prompts so we don't forget stuff such as weapons, drugs, etc.?
So on the online reporting tool, no. There is, however, so there is a box that asks about dangers that a worker might encounter. So like suspected meth lab, dangerous weapons, dangerous animals. But in regards to the box where you fill in your concerns, it's just an open text box. So there are not any prompts for that. But when you call the hotline worker, whoever you speak to, they will have prompts and they will ask questions. Some of the things on your screen: current location, current condition, previous abuse, any other safety issues, they will have prompts to make sure that you are reporting everything and that they've gathered all the information as appropriately as possible.
Okay, so another question is, so for example, the child said, quote, verbatim, whatever the disclosure may be, and this is the background information I have. They're asking if that would be appropriate, and
yes,
and it would.
Yes, that would be, I mean, that's best case scenario. Is this is what was reported to me, and the next line is, this is the information that I have and that I'm aware of. That would be perfect. Okay, I know we've had a lot of information about records on the chat box. I think that we've answered all of the questions.
And I do kind of want to specify what we're asking for, and I don't know if this would help at all or not, but we wouldn't be asking for their, like the books they've checked out, the topics, those kind of things the parents or caregivers have researched. it's more demographic information to be able to locate the child and family. That's
Mhm.
the information we would be asking for, is child's name, address, parents' names, address, perpetrator, not getting into so much their checkout history, what topics they research while at the library, those sort of things we wouldn't be asking for. And I don't know that
So the history of ALA and public libraries I could speak to is, first of all, the checkout information is private, and we went through a period of time where ALA came down and said, then 5 years, 7 years, information security policies became available, and they started pushing that to the point where there are many public libraries that do not hold any of that information in their system. They may just have the name of the person and maybe a contact phone number. At one point in time, we kept driver's license, we kept copies of everything. A lot of those things have been cleaned out and gotten rid of for that very reason, so that it's not even there. And this all comes down to the fact of public libraries being a safe and place for any and everyone to come, and freedom of speech and freedom to read and things of that nature. So it's kind of going against what you are trying to do, which is not meaning to be, but that's why you're going to have so many from the public library realm that are going to probably not be able to disclose that information.
So I will say this, as far as the mandated reporting law, whether an individual, so if an individual is working or not working, so if I, like, for instance, if I'm at the state building and I'm currently on state's time and I'm walking through the parking lot, because we also have public access in our building, and I'm walking through the parking lot and I witness an act of maltreatment, and I happen to see their license plate number in the parking lot, I can make a phone call immediately and I can remain completely anonymous, and it has nothing to do with my job on whether I'm reporting or not. So I can make a report, I can stay anonymous, even though we really urge people not to stay anonymous, and I'll go into that. But I can stay anonymous. And then if I don't know these people's information, name or number or birthday, I might not have any of that information, but I have a license plate number, and I can describe them as describe a white female with brown hair past her shoulders, with, looks like she had blue eyes on this date. I saw that she had a wedding ring on. I can describe them as much as I can, and then provide that license plate number, and I can describe the child as much as I can. Then even with that, we can take a license plate number and we can work with law enforcement to gather that information. So really and truly, I don't think, if you don't have the information offhand, if it would require you to look in your system, we can't ask you to break any regulations that you all have with the Department of Libraries. However, if you know that information personally or not, I think that that's a different scenario. So based off of the policies, and I don't know your name, it says MCPL guest. Are we able to release information such as addresses, phone numbers, et cetera, without warrant? As of right now, it's looking like no, and Amy responded, we may not look up any information to share. We would need a warrant. So in order to access your all's records to gain information, it would require a warrant. But if you see it personally or hear information personally, that's different. If in doubt, check with your branch manager and or director. And I agree with Amy's comment. We don't want anyone to get into trouble, and we go from there. I am for sure going to look into this and see if there's any like regulation or anything like that, or what trumps what. I'm definitely going to do that. I will put it on my to-do list because I think this is some great conversation, and we love it when things like this come up because we can share it with our director, so that we all know exactly what needs to happen. Yes, part 2 webinar. We may have to. I know we're going kind of slow today, so I apologize. Okay, so we've kind of gone over what DCBS will ask if you call into the centralized intake hotline. And if you ever call in and you just say, I don't have a lot of information, but I have this, it's still important. Share whatever information you can. And then the next slide is about our acceptance criteria. So this is where we are going to explain a lot of information. So if we lose you, please feel free to jump in. So acceptance criteria, it's based on the statutory definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency, and it's all found in our regulations and our statutes. And the cabinet does not have the statutory authority to investigate allegations that are not related to identifiable safety issues. So if a report is made and it does not meet our criteria, which we're getting ready to get into, then legally we cannot do anything further. We take the report. If it meets our criteria, then we can. But if it does not meet that threshold of abuse, neglect, or dependency, we cannot do anything else. So there are different screening options. So when you call the hotline, there are 5 different things that could occur. So the first thing is that the allegation would meet our criteria. The second is that it would not meet our criteria. The third is a resource link. The fourth is insufficient information. And the fifth is a law enforcement assist. So we're going to go over meets and does not meet here in a second. So I'm going to jump a little bit further and talk about a resource link. A resource linkage, I think we talk about it on the next slide, but a resource link is anytime if you all or if an individual calls the hotline to make a report and the report may not meet our criteria, it may be calling to ask a question because maybe you overheard something, but you don't know if it needs to be reported or not. Then the intake worker will take your information and can even provide you with more relevant information. So if maybe it's a question about a school-age child and you're concerned because they've been at the library every day and they're not going to school. So they can provide you with the school information, the family resource information, things of that nature. And that would be considered a resource link. Insufficient information is when a report is made and the information may meet criteria. However, we don't have any individual information. So like we don't have any names, birth dates, no driver's license number, no nothing. So we don't know where they live. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they look like. We will still take that report and it's linked under a number. And then if ever there's a time when that caller gains personal information that they can call back and provide, they can give that number and we can link those 2 reports together. But until we know who the report's about, we would not be able to accept it. So it would be logged as insufficient information. And then law enforcement assist is just that. That is when law enforcement reaches out to our cabinet and says, I'm out on this call and I need a social worker out here because I need assistance with X, Y, and Z. Then our social workers go out. Excuse me. Right.
So the next 3 slides are just some basic definitions.
Hey, Sydney.
Yeah.
Hold on one second before we jump in the next one. I think we have.
I know there's been conversation going about the incident report and stuff.
Okay, good. So no more questions?
You all just jump out and tell me if I'm wrong, but that's how I was understanding it, is these were more internal questions about the difference between us and incident reporting and sharing the information.
Great. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I saw a big 10, so I got nervous. Okay, Sydney, sorry about that.
Okay, the slide is not full. Okay, there it is. It's coming. Okay, and yeah, that was just clarification for internal procedures. So The next several slides are just basic definitions the cabinet works under. The cabinet cannot accept a report on a non-caretaker besides female genital mutilation or allegations of human trafficking of minors. Those are the only two programs we can accept non-caretaker reports. When we look at what the definition of caretaker is, it's a parent, a guardian, a fictive kin, person in position of authority or special trust. Fictive kin is the easiest way to explain it is a relative not by blood. This could be mom's best friend who the child calls Aunt so-and-so. There's not that blood relation, but there's that bond. So like I said, the only two programs we can accept on non-caretakers is human trafficking and female genital mutilation. When looking at physical abuse, it's just a non-accidental physical injury. Sexual abuse is inappropriate sexual activity or a sexual assault between a child and caretaker. Neglect is the failure to provide essential care, protection, supervision, food, clothing, any of the basic needs of a child is the failure on the parent or caregiver to ensure these needs are being met. This is also dependent upon the child's age. Another big theme you're going to see with a lot of these programs and sub-programs is not only, as Chelsea said earlier, we have to know how it affects the child, but it's also dependent upon the child's age, chronologically and developmentally. Back to the earlier question asking about dependency dependency is through no fault of the parent or caregiver, the child is without the essential protection or care. The child's not getting their basic needs met, but it's by no fault of the parent or caregiver.
And Sydney, I'm going to jump in really quick. Amy wrote that families use libraries as a quote unquote daycare. Thus, in this case, would we become a caretaker? So that is a very tricky question. After school care, etc. The reason that's tricky is because a librarian could possibly be a person in a position of authority or special trust as defined by KRS 532. However, I think it is truly a case-by-case scenario. And the reason I say that is if a child, let's say a family is new in town and moves in and the child gives a middle school, like a 7th grader, permission that after school they can walk to the library and hang out for an hour before they walk home, that they have permission to do that. So you've got a new kiddo in town who starts coming to the library. That kiddo does not know anyone who works in that library or anything like that. So in that case, that librarian would not be considered a person of authority or special trust because they don't know them. So I really think, exactly, because you all are not liable or responsible for that supervision of the children. I don't think you would be put in that realm of a caretaker. I think it could be different if little Johnny was supposed to go to the library after school because his Aunt Sue worked at the library. I think there's a difference in scenarios there. That's why I say it's definitely a case-by-case situation. Would a child who has run away be in the dependency category? So a runaway child could be considered dependent. However, they could also be considered a victim of neglect based on supervision or lack thereof. So, and that is, again, it's a case-by-case situation, because if a parent knows and is aware that their child so if a parent knows that a child is at higher risk to run away and they don't have safety measures in place for that child, then they could be considered liable for neglect for not supervising that child appropriately. So it's,
That
again,
one, sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say that one, it's also tricky because not only the supervision could be an issue, but as we become involved in that case, more information could come out to where it would meet. There could be other things going on that could meet for other programs as well.
Right.
So just the runaway, we kind of need more information regarding that.
Yeah, and Renee, your comment that you've had instances where mentally disabled adults were left in our care with a sack lunch most of the day and caregiver picks them up later. Legally, are they left in your care and control? Are you able to make decisions for them, or is this simply them dropping them off so that they are in a safe place? Assumed care that they'll be safe. Okay. Because technically you all would still not be liable to provide that care or authority for that individual. And after the second time we report it. Yeah. And I think that that's a good policy to have because that would create a liability for you all. And again, I'm sure that you all, I would guarantee you all have regulations and different rules and things about that, but I think that would make sense. I would look at that as possibly, depending on the individual and depending on their mental capacity, whether or not they are able to make decisions for themselves, especially inappropriate decisions, because that could potentially be lack of supervision on a caretaker if they're just dropping them off because they wouldn't have any so there could also be kids coming to the library on their own because they can't stand to be at home, and it's the same situation. It still does not, that would not put the liability, or that would put the liability on you all. I don't think I'm understanding this question. With no name or contact for a patron. So unfortunately, until a situation would meet our criteria, we would not be able to come out. However, it could possibly be, and this is another thing that I would like to check on, is it may be important that you contact law enforcement for a child welfare situation. Law enforcement can come out and they would be able to intervene, whereas we would have to meet the threshold for abuse and neglect before we were able to come. However, I think though, if you're in a situation where you're witnessing something and these individuals come every day at 10 a.m. and that's your only means, you still make the report and you share that information. So you would have, let's just, for an example, you may have an unknown name mother, unknown name child. And you're going to guess, just because you're around children, that this child might be 4 years old approximately, but you're not able to prove that. But these two individuals come to this library every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and on X amount of days, you have witnessed this maltreatment factor. I would definitely make the report and share that information. So in that case, you wouldn't be sharing any information from your all system that you wouldn't be allowed to, but technically that would provide us with information. And if the reporting source was able to leave their identifying information, then if a worker was given that case, they could reach out to that reporting source and make phone contact with them after the call was accepted and then that worker could say, hey, I have this investigation. I would like to attend the library at 10 a.m. today. Will you be there so that I could complete an interview? And during such time, then the worker could come out and be able to maybe witness or encounter that information. So that's just an example. I can't promise that would meet our criteria. It would be case by case, and it would depend on what the situation was. But I would always make the report and just be very honest and upfront with the intake worker that you don't have the name and you don't have that identifying information, but you do know that these people attend something at a certain time. Okay, I think I've answered those questions. If you all still
Okay.
have questions, let me know. Sydney, sorry, I interrupted you after dependency.
You're fine. So just in regards to human trafficking, so the basic definition is a child performing sexual acts or labor services in exchange for something of value. This could be drugs, money, shelter, etc. We have seen cases where a child has been trafficked by the adult offering the child candy. The two types of human trafficking are commercial sexual exploitation and forced labor. Labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. In Kentucky, a child under the age of 18, there does not have to be force, fraud, or coercion regarding the trafficking for the cabinet and law enforcement to be able to investigate those allegations. Okay, so I'll stop there because we did have another question. If they come up to the desk, don't have their library card, have the individual tell them their name so they can look up the account, could they give that verbal information to us because it was verbally stated they're not looking it up? This was a question for Amy.
Yeah, I definitely think that that would be a department question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are we ready for the next slide, Sydney?
Real quick, so FGM, female genital mutilation, is a procedure that involves partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or any procedure harmful to the female genitalia. And now we're good. So this slide and the next slide are several different types of neglect that the cabinet investigates. So abandonment and supervision is just the child without supervision or appropriate supervision dependent upon the child's age, chronologically, and developmentally. Environmental neglect is a serious health or safety hazard being present and the parent or caregiver not taking action. Again, a big piece of this is the child's age, developmentally and chronologically. Medical neglect is an untreated injury, illness, or condition or disability that may interfere with the normal functioning or worsen without treatment, could become life-threatening, or could result in permanent impairment. A key with this is when it comes to reports of failure to administer medication, the cabinet has to consider whether the lack of medication is having a serious negative impact on the child's ability to function or constitutes as a threat to the child's safety. So risk of harm, it's a very broad category. There's a potential for harm based on risk factors present. Some of these risk factors regard substance misuse, domestic violence, mental health issues, those sort of things. Substance misuse is the caregiver's substance misuse is impacting the child. This is the key with substance misuse. And with a lot of these neglects is how is it impacting the child's developmental and chronological age. Okay, and Amy was answering that question in the chat earlier. Educational neglect, it's dependent upon the age of the child and if the school has exhausted all of the resources, that the parent's neglect is preventing the child from attending or performing in school, etc. Food is the child's dietary needs not being met and their health being impacted. This could be now malnutrition, dehydration. We got to know the period of time this has been going on. Hygiene and clothing neglect is the child's physical health being affected by the caregiver's act or omission. This regards instances such as issues dealing with lice, diaper rash, impetigo, the smell of urine, the child smelling of urine and feces, insufficient clothing for the weather elements. Emotional injury is inflicted harm on a child's emotional well-being by other than accidental means. Often requires a QMHP or qualified mental health provider to complete an assessment on the child. One of the biggest keys is when in doubt, make a report to the cabinet.
So in regards to reports that don't meet our criteria, we've already talked about that we don't have the statutory authority to go out on those reports. So these reports can consist of when a reporting source has generalized feelings of concern regarding the welfare of a child, but does not give specific allegations that would indicate abuse, neglect, or dependency. If a report alleges corporal punishment appropriate to the age of the child without injury or mark, bruise, or substantial risk of harm. If a report concerns child abuse inflicted by a person who is not in the caretaking role, except in those cases of human trafficking or FGM, female genital mutilation. All of these reports are forwarded to local law enforcement agencies, Kentucky State Police, as well as the Commonwealth Attorney and County Attorney. And then any report of a victim over the age of 18. So if a report is called in about anyone over the age of 18, it is assessed for an adult protective services case. It would, however, not be accepted for child protective services. I do want to give an example. We talk about generalized feelings of concern and corporal punishment appropriate to the age of a child without injury, mark, or bruise. So if an individual witnesses a child being spanked, or if an individual witnesses something along those lines, but they can't provide any additional information, we still we still take those reports and document them, but it doesn't mean that they'll meet our criteria for a worker to go out to complete an investigation. This slide is always tricky and it doesn't like to pop up the way it's supposed to. So how do I know if my report gets accepted? State law prohibits the cabinet from disclosing any confidential information about a case to anyone except parents, perpetrators, court personnel, law enforcement, and specific professional providers, which include school personnel, unless they have with a legitimate interest in the case. So any individual that makes a report, also known as a reporting source, anytime that report is made, the centralized intake worker, or if it's on a web portal or the web reporting system, you will receive an ID number or a reference ID. With that number, you can call in later in the day and you can give that number to the centralized intake worker, and they will be able to tell you if the report met our criteria or not. However, they will not be able to share any details of the case. So we do like to differentiate the two. So you will be able to know if the report was accepted or not accepted. You just will not be able to know any of the identifying information of the investigation. And sorry, I was reading through the chat to make sure we hadn't missed anything. So what happens next? Just a quick recap. We've gone over red flags. We've gone over things to be aware of in your areas, or whether or not you're at a virtual platform or in home. Who is responsible for making a report, which is everyone in the state of Kentucky, how to make that report, those contact information. And then we've gone over the criteria of what constitutes abuse, neglect, or dependency. So could you speak to a parent being obviously abused who comes into the library with a child?
Are you meaning in regards to like concerns of domestic violence between the parents or caregivers?
So, okay, with domestic violence. So there have been some changes in regarding the laws around domestic violence over the past few years, or I guess a few years ago, and then how those cases are accepted and investigated. So if you are aware of an act of domestic violence that has occurred with when children are present, or if children reside in the home, we would say yes, make a report. However, one of the key things that you want to provide in that report is how the children are affected. We used to, I say we, I'm talking about the department, DCBS, CPS. We used to accept all reports of domestic violence, um, and they were investigated together. So normally, an abusive situation that would have gone to adult protective services, but our policy used to have us investigate the adult protective services and the child protective services all in one case. It was called a concurrent domestic violence case. However, our policy we no longer do that because the laws regarding domestic violence have changed. So we would still definitely say call that report in because it still could meet our policies regarding neglect or abuse, depending on the situation. But you definitely want to share how the children are affected or if the children are present during the violent altercation. So if a mother, or I don't want to say mother because I don't want, it could happen to male or female. If a parent comes in and says something along those lines, thanks, Amy. Something along the lines of that they are a victim and that they're concerned because their children are aware of it. Definitely, that would definitely constitute a referral, and you would share all of that information. Okay. And then on this slide, you'll see what happens next. So if a report is made and it's accepted for an investigation, a social worker has a set time, has different timeframes on when they need to contact a victim. So our cases are broken down into different types. So you'll see the imminent, high, moderate, or low, and those all have a correlating time frame. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and then I'm going to go on and move forward. But so our high risk cases, also known as our imminent cases, would be a 4-hour initiation time frame. So that means from the time that we receive that report from the reporting source, that report is accepted, excuse me, and given to a worker. That worker has 4 hours to make contact, which is face-to-face contact with a victim. These are cases that have to do with human trafficking and sexual abuse when the perpetrator has access to the child. Also, it could be a physical abuse report, excuse me. I got choked. It could also be a physical abuse referral regarding a child that's age 4 and under. Or it could also be an older child, depending on the allegation of the case. High risk cases could be any of those scenarios. It could also include substance abuse when a child is being cared for by a parent who may be under the influence of substances. Moderate to low risk cases would normally be cases that are environmental neglect or educational neglect, or those cases that have to do, when I say environmental, I'm talking about like a dirty home, or if there are rodents or things like that involved. That would be our moderate to low risk cases. We do have some physical abuse cases that would be considered moderate to low if a perpetrator does not have access to the child. So if the child is safe and we can prove that. And these timeframes are all regulated in our Kentucky administrative regulations. Sorry, guys, I keep coughing.
Also, another thing that goes into these timeframes is the age of the child. As Chelsea said earlier, the physical abuse 4 and under, regards to substance misuse, the age of the child, environmental, depends on the age of the child. that is one of the factors that can bump up a report to be a quicker initiation time frame, or allow it to be a 48 or 72 hour. So in regards to COVID, because it's just completely changed the way all of us are working, the cabinet has changed some of the ways we initiate cases. So on the 4 and 24-hour timeframes, the imminent and the high-risk timeframes, we are still doing everything as we were pre-COVID, seeing people face-to-face, as long as it is appropriate. And I say appropriate depending on the COVID screener, which I'll get into here in a minute. On lower risk, the 48-hour and 72-hour timeframes, we are trying to use other than in-person face-to-face means. This could be video platforms such as Zoom, Google Duo, Teams, those sort of things. We're still doing our investigations as we normally would, speak to the children alone, speak to the non-offending caregiver alone, the perpetrator alone, getting a tour of the home, just doing it with technology instead of coming into the homes in person. At any time in any of these cases, if a concern comes up that warrants us going out in person, we are, regardless of the timeframes at that point. When a reporting source calls in a report, we have a screener now for COVID-19 that centralized intake will ask the reporting source questions to their knowledge to determine any possible exposure before staff go out.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about our safety and prevention plans. These are two different plans that the cabinet utilizes when an intervention becomes necessary with a family. So the new safety plan and prevention plan, we actually released those in our policy this past June, and practice guidance was laid out for all of our staff to utilize these plans appropriately for different interventions regarding safety threats and risk factors for families. So if you ever hear a social worker talk about, or during a case talk about a safety plan or prevention plan, we wanted you all to know what that meant and the safety, or I'm sorry, the timeframes around those plans. So a safety plan is utilized to address very immediate safety threats on a very short-term basis. And it actually is only utilized for 14 days, where a prevention plan is utilized to mitigate identified risks. The prevention plan can actually be utilized for 30 days. So these plans will only be used if we actually have an open investigation with the family. If a worker goes out and finds that there is a safety threat and that we have to step in to ensure the safety of a child, that's where a safety plan would be utilized. And it's a written plan with the family, and it would include anyone that needs to be involved in that child's life to ensure that safety is made. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of information on that. We also want to talk about safety and risk, and then our definitions and how we describe those. So safety refers to a current condition within a home or family and considers whether or not there is an immediate threat of danger to a child. So any of those safety threats we talk about, or threats of danger, that's how we look at safety and when a child is deemed to be safe. That safety threat refers to a specific family situation that could be considered out of control, imminent, and likely to have severe effects on the child. That child is assessed to be safe when there's no threat of danger found within the family or home. And if that threat does exist, the family has sufficient protective capacity to protect the child and manage the threat. Therefore, one example of that is if a parent is abusing substances, but that parent takes that issue on themselves and they reach out to a family member to supervise their child, that would be them mitigating that safety threat. So they are seeking that help and they are making sure that their child is safe so that their drug dependency situation is not affecting the child. So that's just one example. There's lots of different examples of that, but I utilize the drug one because we do see that a lot, especially here in Kentucky, unfortunately. So these are just some examples of safety threats. These are also can be case specific, and then one little piece of information could change the way that it would be considered. So a safety threat could be considered a 5-year-old found home alone, an 8-year-old that intervened in an incident of domestic violence and sustained injuries, especially if the perpetrator has access, a 1-year-old who sustained an unexplained injury to the head or ears, an 11-year-old who is being sexually abused by the father and the mother is is aware but unable to protect, or 4 or 5-year-old being cared for by a parent who is actively under the influence of heroin. We want to explain that a parent also demonstrates an observable impairment in their ability to parent the child. That's what puts the child in danger. So for risk factors, risk refers to the likelihood of maltreatment occurring in the future. An assessment of risk includes the identification of risk factors, which are family behaviors that create an environment or circumstance that increase the chance that parents or caregivers will maltreat their children. Some examples are that a mother has a prior substantiated report leaving a 3-year-old child home alone 1 year ago, of a dad who was in treatment 2 years ago for alcohol abuse due to his kids and having his kids in the car. A mom who is schizophrenic, but when she takes her medication, she's able to provide care for her child. A paramour who is on the sexual offender registry for having sex with a 13-year-old child, or a long history of alcohol and drug use to include criminal sanctions, but no indications of current use. So these risk factors are all of different levels. So for instance, a parent who has previously gone through treatment, that is a risk factor, but it might not be as serious as the risk factor of a parent who has a paramour who's been on the sexual offender registry in the past and is living with a child. So there are different risk factors that we look at and that we evaluate them on different levels. And then we put plans in to work to ensure that these risk factors don't lead to that future maltreatment. That's our goal. And that's why we look for the different risk factors in cases. We just kind of wanted to let you all know the different things that we look at.
And I do want to explain, we can still go to the other slide. There is some level of risk present at some time in most families. It's when it rises to that level of there being issues with it, if that makes sense.
Correct. Yeah. So risk factors, we could point out I could point out risk factors in my current home right now, and I have a young child. You can look at risk factors of varying degrees. It's how those risk factors could affect a child in the future. And those are things that we look for. Okay, so I wanted to share this slide, the investigation steps. So the first step was the assessment, and that's when we actually look at those safety threats and those risk factors. A worker would complete interviews, observations, make collateral interviews, or take photos during that investigation or assessment phase. And towards the end of that investigation, the worker would have consultation with their supervisor and can also complete another consultation form that we have, which is the risk and safety consultation. And they can also staff with the county attorney. And then the ending steps of an investigation are the results and findings and what the finding would be of that investigation. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. And I do want to point out, we have about 15 minutes left. I think we're going to make it through. So I'm going to, if I'm talking too fast, please ask questions, but I do want to make it through. I don't want to keep you all longer than what we intended. So we do have 30 days to complete an investigation, and that is 30 business days to complete that investigation. However, some cases do require an extension. these reasons for the extension could be due to another agency that is expected to make available information that's necessary to make the finding, a specialized investigation that requires a large number of individual interviews or consultation with central office, or law enforcement is conducting criminal investigation that's not been completed in their work on the case. So like a specialized investigation, an example of that would be an investigation on a daycare facility where there's multiple children. And not only do we have to interview those children, but we have to interview their parents. So that could be upwards of 20 to 30 individuals that would have to be interviewed for that investigation on top of collateral interviews for each one of those children. So that's a lot of interviews. So sometimes those do require going beyond that 30-day requirement. And then this is our findings information. So every investigation that we do at the end, we will make a finding on. So the 3 different findings that we have is an unsubstantiated finding, which means that there was not sufficient evidence, indicators, or justification that would to exist for the substantiation of abuse, neglect, or dependency for those definitions that's in our regulations. The next one is in need of services, which means the overall assessment indicates a low to moderate risk of maltreatment if the issue or concerns identified fall below the level that would indicate that a protection case needs to be opened. The parent refusing services, or it's determined to be a low risk case. The case can be closed with an aftercare plan developed with the family that links them to community resources to prevent the reoccurrence of a reported incident. And then last is a substantiated case, which means that injury or risk of injury was inflicted, or that the basic needs of a child were not met. The injury or risk or omission of care was inflicted non-accidentally or intentional by a caretaker. So when a case is opened, and what I mean by that is for those cases that are either in need of or substantiated, there is a little bit of a difference there. Both of those cases, those findings can be opened or closed, but in the majority of times, when you have a case, an investigation that has a finding of in need of services or a substantiated finding, it results in an open case. So when an investigation is complete, an ongoing case may be opened if further intervention is required. So the next steps are that the family and community partners engage in a case planning conference with their worker. A plan of action and expectation is developed to guide the case. If court action is necessary or active, the family's case plan also becomes part of the court orders that are in that case. A worker will make at least monthly home visits to the family and the children and document progress in areas of concerns. And the worker will also need to maintain contact with different service providers that are involved with the family. The worker will also initiate services and referrals to assist the family, whether that be through first steps, hands, mental health services, childcare assistance. This could also include things like substance abuse assessments or domestic violence assessments, different perpetrator assessments as well. So for court action, there are 2 different types of petitions that we like to talk about. One is an emergency custody order, and then the second one is a dependency, abuse, and neglect petition. So the emergency custody order is used when a child is at immediate risk. So if that child is found, those safety threats are found, and the cabinet has to intervene and request custody from the court, that's when an emergency custody order is utilized. The worker would staff the emergency removal with their FSOS, which is their supervisor, or their SRAA, which is the supervisor. And they would do that consultation and talk about that case through the safety and risk consultation form. The petitions would then be filed and emergency custody would be requested from the judge. If that ECO or that emergency custody would be granted, the judge would sign off on that and the child would be placed with an approved relative or in foster care or with a fictive kin provider. Within 72 hours of the emergency custody order being signed, a temporary removal hearing is held. And at that hearing is when the judge would hear all of the remarks and evidence from the cabinet on whether or not to continue that petition. The next petition that I talked about, the dependency, abuse, and neglect petition, that if that were approved from a supervisor for a worker to file, then a worker would file that and the case would be heard within 10 days of that petition being filed. And then that would make that case court active. This would allow for the case plan to be part of those court orders and can help with a family to become compliant when working with our agency if they're not have not been compliant with the case thus far. The judge can assist the cabinet in monitoring the case and working towards reunification. If reunification does not occur within a specific time frame, a judge can request a waiver to extend the time, or the cabinet can file a petition for termination of parental rights. So this is a list of information about court proceedings. If you as an individual were ever subpoenaed or had to go to court for any reason regarding a CPS case, this would be rare, but it could occur. If you're subpoenaed to appear in court, contact the issuing attorney and discuss preparation for your testimony. You'll need to be prepared with relevant and reliable information. Be prepared to testify truthfully in a clear and concise manner. Do not elaborate and answer questions that you were asked to the best of your knowledge. If you're unsure, ask the question to be clarified, repeated, or explained. Be a credible witness. Do not say, I don't know, as it can discredit the validity to your testimony. Instead, say things like, I don't recall, or I'm unaware, or to the best of my knowledge. Understand the difference between fact and hearsay, and answer directly to the attorney or to the judge, and don't engage with clients from the stand. And for any other information that you may need about court proceedings, you can always reach out to our Office of Legal Services here in Frankfurt. These are a list of resources. So this top, the Child Protection Branch, this is the branch that Sydney and I work for. So you all can email us there or at our personal emails or our work emails that are provided in the chat. And we'll get back to you as quick as we can. The next link is for our online reporting system. So you can make a report of abuse, neglect, or dependency via the online web portal. And then the third bullet down is the abuse hotline. The fourth bullet down is the Office of the Ombudsman. And this is the number that you would call or you can provide to other individuals if they have a complaint about DCBS or about their social worker. It would all go through the Ombudsman's office. And then the Division of Family Resource and Youth Service Centers. This link will actually tell you what region and contact information for frisky workers are in your area. And then here are some information, some COVID-19 resources that we wanted to share with you all. The DCBS link, the Kentucky Community Action Partners, Family Support Hotline number, and then the Team Kentucky website, which gives lots of updated information about COVID-19. And then the next 2 pages, I believe, are continued resources for COVID-19, especially the United Way, the 211. This can provide information and resources to families for housing, utilities, health, food, etc. So we wanted to make sure that you all had all of this information to be able to share to families that might be utilizing your services. And I know we had lots of discussion today, especially regarding how you all can make reports and different things like that regarding your all's rules and regulations. So like I said before, I am going to be looking into those things, and whether I found information or not, I'll reach back out with Amy. But if you all ever have any questions, especially if they're more case specific questions and you don't really know how to proceed, feel free to reach out to Sydney and I, and we will try to help you all out as best that we can.
We did have a question. You may have answered this, but what are the ages of children that can be left alone at the library, and how old can caregivers be or need to be? Somebody, and this might be an internal procedure policy for you all, somebody did answer underneath 12 and up.
So I will say that for our policy, we do not have any type of policies on the age limits for children to be left alone at home nor in public. There aren't any regulations like that in the state of Kentucky. As far as caregivers, we can accept reports of maltreatment on children who are ages 12 and older. So for instance, if a 12-year-old is babysitting a younger child, they're then the caretaker. If that 12-year-old were to abuse that child, we can take a report on that 12-year-old. It is definitely case by case. And it depends on what the allegation is, but we can take a report on a caregiver being age 12 and up. As far as an age being left alone in the library, I think that would be, it would depend on what your regulations were, your policies.
And Amy answered the question about if there's these issues, speak to your branch manager and or director first. We do have another question. Are the website and phone systems the same for reporting? In another state, they wanted us to use a web report if the report was not as urgent, and phone if it was.
So that's totally up to you. Some people feel more comfortable calling. The biggest thing is that our website is shut down after 4:30 during those business hours, and then it is not activated during any state holiday. Yeah, if the problem is what we don't like to say use the web portal for cases that are not urgent, because that terminology can be subjective. And so if we really like to tell people, I tell everybody to use the hotline and call, just because our workers are trained, like we talked about earlier, to prompt individuals and ask questions to make sure that they're getting all the information they need for a report. So especially to individuals who have never made a report before, I would urge them to call the hotline. However, the reporting, the online reporting tool that is utilized goes straight to the same workers. So those workers process that report the same way they do a phone call. So it's to each their own.
And it's one of those, there's always, if it's something imminent right then and there going on that you believe is a safety threat to the child, an example, an active assault going on, call law enforcement first. They can get there quicker than we can. And we work closely with law enforcement in these cases. So if there's ever anything urgent actively going on that you think is a safety issue, contact law enforcement. They can get a hold of us, trust me, very easily. And we can still get dispatched out. Just want to ensure the safety of everybody.
Correct. And Pam answered, our unattended child policy says that a child under 12 may not be left alone at the library. However, if a parent or grandparent wants to leave a child for a program, then we allow it. But we are small enough that we know most of our patrons and know which ones will try to take advantage. Yeah.
There was a question above that asking how old can a child be left at home alone? There's no statute, no age in statute or regulations. This falls under the maturity of the child, the developmental age, the chronological age, their access to any emergency services, such as do they know what to do in case of an emergency? Are there neighbors close by, family members?
So those are some of the questions. Yeah, and those are some of the questions that our hotline workers would ask if a report was called in about a child, like a young child being left at home alone. They would ask those prompting questions for us to be able to make an appropriate decision on whether or not a case met our criteria or not. You all have had wonderful questions today. I hope that we have answered them and gotten you all some answers. I know that there are some things that might need some clarification on that we're going to look into. So
Well, I just want to thank both of you for being here and sharing so much of your wisdom and knowledge with us and working through all the questions that we put you through. I have on the screen your email addresses so people can have access to them. And as ever, we want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for the funding to be able to do this webinar. But again, thank you again, Chelsea and Sydney, for doing this for us and
yeah.
really sharing your time. We greatly appreciate it. And I suspect if you check the chat, they're going to be blasting their thanks to you.
Well,
As
and
ever, I was going to say, as ever, if you guys have questions, you have Chelsea and Cindy's emails here. You have the other information. We will be sending out the links to this recording so you can have access to it later and, do screenshots to print out the information. I know a lot of information came your way, and so I'll try and get this out to you on a timely basis. And go ahead, I'll let you.
No, I was just going to say, I did share it again in the chat, but I will also email it to you, Amy, here in just a few minutes.
Thank you so much. So thank you again to all that came. And we really appreciate, especially Chelsea and Sydney, for you doing this for us.
No problem.
So I'm going to let everybody go and have a good rest of your day and look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.